I've just been given the brand new Titleist Vokey SM9 wedges a thorough test, and for me there are three key takeaways that I've noticed testing them up against my current SM8 wedges that make these different than what we've seen before. So without further ado, let's dive into those three things that make SM9 stand out over SM8. So the first change I noticed with SM9 is how they look, and on first inspection they actually look quite similar to the SM8. You've got that kind of muscle back design. There's not a whole lot of difference here with how they look versus SM8, and they come in the same three finishes, that jet black, the brushed steel and the chrome finish. All look absolutely fantastic, but if you delve a little deeper you'll notice a couple of little changes. The first is in those higher lofty wedges. You'll see there is a thicker toe pad here in that high toe section. It's not something that's new. We've seen it with SM7 wedges before. I'm going to come on to a little bit later in this video about what that does in terms of the performance, but that thicker toe pad is very well hidden at address, so you don't really notice it down behind the ball. So Titleist done a really good job of masking that kind of technology. And the second thing I notice in those lower lofts is how the leading edge is slightly straighter, and there's a little bit less offset there in those lower lofts. So kind of the 48 up to 50, maybe even the 52, just looks a little bit more iron-like in profile down behind the ball. That's a change I definitely like. I like that transition into from your irons into your wedges. You don't want the leading edge to be too curved. I think it can make alignment a little bit more difficult. I like if you're hitting full shots, the straighter the leading edge, the better. So those are two changes that I've noticed with SM9 that definitely are visually noticeable, and with that straighter leading edge in those lower lofts, it's a really good change. Now the second takeaway with the SM9 wedges is down to the flight, and specifically for me in those higher lofty wedges. I mentioned earlier in the video about that thicker toe pad in those higher lofts. It is progressive, kind of gets thinner towards those lower lofts, and what that essentially does is it gets the CG projecting higher on the face, so it should help the ball flight be a little bit lower. Generally speaking, tour pros, good amateurs, they want to see that low ball flight that checks up really quickly when it lands. And from the testing I did here on the short game area at Woburn Golf Club, it's noticeable how much lower those lob wedge pitch shots were flying, kind of those 40, 50 yard pitch shots. It was a good 4 to 5 yards lower than what I currently used to with my 54 degree even, which is the shot I normally use. From that distance I usually get my 54 out, maybe open the face slightly, but that flight window was much lower than I was expecting with a higher lofted wedge. So that's something you'll definitely notice with SM9 versus SM8, a lower ball flight when you're chipping and pitching with those higher lofts. And the third point I would make about SM9 is how crucial it is to get fitted. With so many different options available, those options haven't changed with SM9 compared to SM8. There's still those 23 different loft and bounce and grind options, but if you go through that fitting process, it might throw up some anomalies or some changes in your spec setup that could make a big difference to your game. Having gone through that process, I was thinking that maybe my spec would be like for like from SM8 into SM9, but actually going through that process turned out actually going into a higher lofted lob wedge with a slightly more forgiving grind. So I went from a 58 degree with a D grind in my SM8 going into a K grind in a 60 degree in that lob wedge with the SM9. Did two things for me. It gave me more options outside of bunkers. So I would only use my lob wedge really in bunkers, but the fact that I've got a nice forgiving sole there gave me a bit more options, a bit more versatility, chipping around the green if I have to get over a bunker, where typically I'd kind of open the face of my 54 and pray. This has given me a lot more margin for error on the strike with those types of shots, and it's not ballooning too high because of that centre of gravity story we talked about earlier. So I feel like a 60 degree in that K grind is giving me a lot more options around the green, still really effective out of bunkers, but that's where a fitting can throw up a few surprises. So I'd always recommend go and get custom fitted, because it might well change the way you view your wedge game. It might, you might think your wedge game is relatively one-dimensional. You might find yourself thinking that you're a weak wedge player, when actually a change in the grind or the loft or the bounce in your wedges could turn your short game from a weakness into a strength, because it gives you that confidence that you've got the tools that are designed correctly to pull off the shot at hand. So that's definitely something I noticed every year. No matter how many times I get fitted for Vokey wedges, something always new comes up in terms of the way the wedges are set up. Obviously it changes with your technique and the courses you play, etc. But always worth getting a refresher on those wedges. Titleist say you should be changing them anyway every 75 rounds or 500 shots, give or take. So if your wedges are a few years old, I think you're really going to notice a difference, both in terms of the spin control you get with SM9. We haven't really touched on that yet, but I think basically if you're using SM8, you're not going to see a huge jump in terms of the amount of spin you get with SM9, but obviously fresh grooves, you will get a little bit more. But if your wedges are a few years old, maybe SM6, SM7, you'll really notice that extra bite that you get on the second, third bounce with SM9. It's definitely one of the highest spinning wedges I've ever tested. And they've got a new cutting process as well with these spin mill grooves. Yeah, they're right at the edge in terms of the tolerances, in terms of giving you the maximum amount of spin. You know, and I think that's just going to give you more confidence. You can be more aggressive with your landing areas. You can get up and down more often when you're short-sided, and that's going to give you the confidence that you need to hopefully score a little bit better. So that's it from me. Hope you enjoyed my take on the new SM9 wedges. You know, definitely a minor evolution versus a revolution, but you know, with SM8 being such an excellent product, there was no need to make drastic changes to the way it was designed. It still gives you excellent feel, excellent spin control, excellent versatility, arguably best in class versatility versus the competition. But for me, those changes that we've made in terms of the looks, the flight, and how a fitting can really help, definitely puts it right up there as one of the very best wedges that Titleist has ever made. So that's all from me. Hope you enjoyed this video. Do click the like button if you like what you watch, and comment on the video. Tell me, are you excited to try the SM9 wedges? What are you looking to transform with your wedge game the most, and could a new set of wedges do that? I think it probably could. But that's all from me. From Wayburn Golf Club, I'll see you next time.